This is my European Russian versus Asian Russian food cuisines presentation. So, just to dive right into it, it's important to have the brief context for modern Russia, the geography of it, the climate of it, and that's what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of slides here. So, going back about 100 years ago, this is the map on our left-hand side of the Russian Empire right before the formation of the Soviet Union. As you could tell uh, on this map, a lot of parts of Europe and even Asia are under Russian Empire control. This was a very, very huge empire, one of the most powerful ones at its time, and it provided a lot of locals a vast amount of resources, and it also provided a lot of different types of cuisines because the geography of this is uh, particularly interesting because it's the fact that it's two continents into one, essentially, where you could see on the west side it's harboring almost to the Atlantic Ocean. You see, you have Norway covering up there, but on the east side, you have the Pacific Ocean harboring Russia, and that caused a very rich resource of fish and plants, vegetation, different types of cattle. And in our next slide, we're going to talk about a little bit of the climate that we see for modern Russia. So, although it's a very big country, and this is the map currently for the modern day Russia. Although it's a very big country, more or less, it's very similar throughout the country. As you could tell, according to the map, the variations mainly are more north to south rather than east to west. As you could tell, the north is very, very cold on average temperatures, while the south is more warm as it's closer to the equator. The average January temperatures, they range from 0 to -5 Celsius in the south, while the north ranges from -45 to 55 Celsius. And July has ranges from +1 on the north, while the south ranges from 24 to 25 Celsius. Now, it's also very important to note that in the parts of the very cold areas of Russia, a lot of that is very primarily made up of uninhabited land, or at least small villages that are located on there. Primarily, what we're going to be talking about is the more populated areas, the more established areas of Russia, which experience more or less very similar weather, similar climate. So continuing on the context for Russia, we'll wrap that up quick here. This is the current map of Russia. This is the modern day Russia that we know today. And as you could tell, after the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of the country has still been preserved. However, a lot of places, such as you can see on the west side, where now Finland, Belarus, and Ukraine are located, that has been taken away from Russian controls, as well as countries like Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and a little bit of even China now has more areas of control that used to be to Russia. It will be covered later in the presentation when it comes to kind of the how that correlates. In this presentation, we're going to be mainly talking about the current Russian cuisine comparisons between East and West. However, it is also important to mention that Russia did have a major influence on the cuisines of a lot of other countries, such as China, Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and etc. And that could be a whole separate presentation made, as there is a lot of things to unravel there. But jumping straight into it, let's talk about the Asian Russian cuisines. Doing the research for Asian Russian cuisines was more challenging than expected, as I was trying to find distinct cuisines throughout Asia, Russia. However, it doesn't seem like there's a very strong presence of that. However, I did find some useful articles, some useful information about what kind of different types of resources that are available given on each side of the country. And so that's what we're going to be diving into. So, on the right hand side, on the right corner, you have a food map. Different types of foods, different types of ready-made meals, and also just meats that are available depending on the region. When we're looking on the eastern side of Russia, the region side of Russia, you could tell primarily it is made out of seafood uh, cuisines, as that's what's most available over there, really, is the seafood. So, a few examples because there's so many listed on here. The Kamchatka region has the king crab, which is number 27, as you can see on the map, and that's just just on the border of the Pacific Ocean. And then you have Strogania, which is also another type of fish in Yakuta. That's also very eastern of Russia, so that's pretty far away from where most civilization of the Russian population lives. However, there's still communities there that uh, utilize this meal. And then salmon roe is actually a very common um, Russian cuisine, found not just also in the eastern portion of Russia, but also in western portions of Russia. However, it is imported mostly from the eastern portion of Russia, as that's where you find most of the salmon and most natural salmon abundance, as you could say. So on the bottom left, we have the salmon roe, and then we have strogania as a couple of visual examples of the foods that you would see on a traditional gathering. And jumping into a little bit more of what I talked about earlier about the influences, there is a development happening in Asian Russia. There's now a bigger influence of also Asian food culture making its way into Russia. There are certain communities, certain cities, such as this restaurant right here, a noodle bar called Mary Wong, in the city of Rostov. It is making its way into Russia. There's the concept of fusion Asian foods making its way, although it's still very new and it's still very foreign to most Russian locals, as they're very accustomed to the traditional Russian cuisines and whatnot. But however, I do feel like it is important to mention that there is a development currently happening within the Russian food culture, especially on the Asian side of it. When talking about the European Russian cuisines, we're just going to refer to the map earlier, although I don't have it listed in here. I did write down some examples of the primarily most Western kind of cuisines and kind of the more recognizable ones. Uh, One thing that we can take away from the map, though, is that there is a much, much less abundance of seafood and variation of seafood at that compared to the Asian side, Russia. The geography sort of kind of limits the western side of Russia from neighboring any oceans. Although it is close to the Atlantic Ocean, it does not border the Atlantic Ocean. So there's a lot more different types of vegetation, different types of cuisines and resources that are available. So for example, is the Yurev porridge, which is a type of kind of oatmeal, a Russian kind of oatmeal that's in the Leningrad region. And I chose that one specifically because that's where my family's from. Although I personally actually never had this type of porridge, I know it's still sold in most Russian restaurants out in St. Petersburg in that Leningrad region, and it's still very popular to this day. You have the Osetian pie from Ossetia, and then the Komstrovsky cheese from the Kostroma region. The cheese is, I believe, a hardened cheese that's actually very popular in a lot of different parts of Russia. So I have two images down there, the Gorev porridge and the sentient pie, as kind of visual examples of what that looks like. So kind of going into the similarities and differences, this is where it gets a little tricky because there's unanimous identity behind these Russian cuisines. Many people in the world know about pelmeni, chicken oливье, blины. Those are very unanimously used cuisines on both sides of the country. However, when you really take a deep look into the specific cuisines of Russia, depending on the resources available, you get to see the differences in both sides and how different communities utilize the different resources to make their own cuisines of sorts, and how also the influences of neighboring countries and areas and regions kind of seep their way into influencing uh, what the cuisines are. Seafood has a huge role to play for both sides, as mentioned multiple times in this presentation, uh, because the Asian side of Russia has so much access to the ocean. Fishing is a very big key to their day-to-day foods. And then on the eastern side is more vegetation, more agriculture. As we saw on the climate map, it's a little warmer on the western side, so the vegetation, the farming is much easier to do over there than it would be on the Asian side of Russia. And that is the presentation. These are my references. Thank you so much for watching, and have a good one.